All right, so, we're all about diving deep into really cool topics, and today we're going to take a look at Rotterdam.
A great choice.
Yeah. I think most people, when they think about the Netherlands, you know, Amsterdam comes to mind, and
Right.
all the canals and the bicycles,
Yeah.
um, and, maybe The Hague, the seat of government, but
Right.
Rotterdam sometimes gets overlooked, and
hmm
that's a shame because it's a really, really fascinating place with a really interesting history.
Yeah, and to your point, it is the second largest city in the Netherlands
It is, yeah.
and a very, very important port, obviously,
Right.
a global hub. So,
Globally, yeah.
yeah, so there's a lot there to unpack.
So yeah, we've got a ton of really great material that we've collected on the city of Rotterdam, and we want to present to you some of those interesting things that we found.
I think it's going to be an interesting one for sure.
Yeah, so maybe we should start right at the beginning
Okay.
with the name Rotterdam. I mean, it's such a simple name, but it is.
It literally means dam on the River Rot.
Yeah, man.
Right there in the origins of the city are right there.
And if we were to get super technical, dam is dam, and then Rotte
Oh, yes.
is the river.
The river.
So it really is dam on the River Rotte. It's not like a figurative.
Yeah.
It's really literal.
So Rotterdam began as a literal dam on this river. And then over time, a settlement grew up around that dam.
Exactly. And it grew and grew and grew.
And then in 1340, it was granted city rights.
By William IV, Count of Holland.
So officially a city.
City rights.
And I mean, at the time, the city was pretty small.
Yeah, just a few thousand people.
A far cry from the bustling metropolis it is today.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, the story of Rotterdam is a fascinating one, full of, twists and turns. And there are a few things that I came across while I was doing the research for this that I found particularly surprising.
Oh, yeah, let's hear them. Well, for one, did you know that during World War I, Rotterdam was actually the world's largest spy center?
Yeah, it was wild, right? Like,
Who would have thought?
it doesn't seem like it would have been that place, but they had a great, they had their neutral stance
And neutrality.
right, and their location. So it really worked out.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I thought was really interesting is that, because of, some of the things that we'll talk about, the cityscape is basically totally new. It's been transformed.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to kind of learn about how that happened.
Yeah, there's really not a lot of medieval
Right.
stuff left,
And it's super modern. Like,
but it's super modern.
yeah, it's got this really cool modern vibe.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the beginning. We talked about how Rotterdam started as a dam on the River Rotte. But before that, there was actually a settlement there as early as 950 AD.
And the river was originally called Rotta, which meant muddy water. So you get a picture of, yeah, it was called muddy water, and then it became the Rotterdam, dam on the muddy water.
Dam on the muddy water. Wow.
Yeah.
So not very glamorous beginnings.
No, not glamorous at all.
But, I guess they saw something there.
Yeah.
And they built the dam. They started the settlement.
Well, and I think also, they built that dam because around 1150, there were some pretty bad floods.
I see.
So it was kind of out of necessity.
Right. So they had to build these protective dikes and dams to protect themselves from
the water.
From the water. Yeah.
Yeah, and that really set the stage for Rotterdam's future.
Yeah. And so then in the 1260s, the dam that gives the city its name was built.
Right at the present-day Hoogstraat, which is still there today.
Wow. So you can actually go and
You can still see it.
see where it all began.
Yeah.
And then another important development was the completion of the Rotterdam Sea Canal around 1350.
And this was a huge thing for Rotterdam because it connected it to these larger towns to the north.
It was like a trade route.
Exactly. It was a trade route, and it turned Rotterdam into this transshipment center that linked the Netherlands, England, and Germany.
Wow. So even back then, it was already starting to become this important hub for trade and transportation.
Right. And this is where you start to see the roots of its port taking hold.
Yeah. And speaking of its port, there's a part of Rotterdam's history that we really need to talk about because it's significant and it's sobering.
Mm-hmm.
From the 1600s to 1814, Rotterdam was involved in the Atlantic slave trade.
It was.
And in fact, the sources that we looked at mentioned that Rotterdam merchants were actually pioneers of the Dutch slave trade.
Yeah, there was evidence that their ships were actively involved in,
Right.
in that trade.
So they were sailing to Africa, they were sailing to the Americas.
The Americas,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's important to remember that this is a part of Rotterdam's past, even though it's a very difficult part of its past.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's something that we need to acknowledge and learn from.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's worth noting that this trade was eventually abolished in 1814, but it left a lasting impact on the city.
It did.
Um, but moving on, Rotterdam continued to develop as a major port even after the abolition of the slave trade.
Right.
It became an important seat for both the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC,
Right.
and the Dutch West India Company, the WIC.
Huge global players.
Huge, yeah. So these were massive companies that were involved in trade all over the world, and Rotterdam was a key part of that.
And, they had offices there and everything, so it was a big deal for the city.
Right. So this was really solidifying Rotterdam's place as a major global port.
Yeah, and I think the real explosive growth came after the completion of the Nieuwe Waterweg in 1872.
The Nieuwe Waterweg. So what was that?
It was this new waterway, direct link to the North Sea.
Wow. So no more kind of going around through
Exactly.
channels and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was basically this highway straight to the sea.
So I imagine that must have been just a game changer for the port.
Transformative, yeah. You could get these much larger, more modern ships into the port.
Right.
So yeah, it was a huge deal.
And so the city expanded then onto the south bank of the river.
Exactly.
And what about the Withuis?
The Withuis, the White House.
Right, the White House.
They built that in 1898.
Yeah, and it was a skyscraper, right?
It was a skyscraper. They were inspired by American architecture.
I see.
And for a time, it was the tallest office building in Europe.
So they were really like reaching for the sky.
Yeah, it was definitely a symbol of Rotterdam's ambition and its kind of forward-looking attitude.
Yeah. And then, of course, the 20th century brought about a lot of change. We talked about how Rotterdam was a major spy center during World War I.
That's right. MI6, the British intelligence agency, had their main European office in Rotterdam.
Wow. And so you had all these German secret agents operating there.
They did. In fact, one of them, a guy named Karl Lottie, he was actually apprehended and executed in Britain later on.
Wow. And there were also a lot of refugees in the city, right?
Yeah, you had around 25,000 Belgian refugees,
Oh.
as well as German deserters and escaped Allied prisoners of war.
So it was a really interesting mix of people in the city at that time.
Very, very dynamic.
Yeah. And then, of course, World War II.
That's where things take a turn for the tragic.
Yeah. So in May 1940, the Germans invaded the Netherlands.
And the Dutch, they put up a fight.
They did. They fought back.
They did.
But unfortunately, Rotterdam suffered a really devastating bombing by the Luftwaffe.
That was on May 14th, 1940. Just awful.
Yeah, the city center was basically almost completely destroyed.
Pretty much wiped out.
And, 80,000 civilians were left homeless.
And around 900 people died.
Yeah. So a massive loss of life, a huge amount of destruction.
And they say that number would have been a lot higher if many residents hadn't already fled because of the ongoing fighting.
Right. But even in all that destruction, there was one building that survived.
The City Hall.
Yeah. And it's kind of a symbol, isn't it?
It is a symbol of resilience.
Of the city's resilience.
Yeah, and I think Osip Zadkian's statue, The Destroyed City, does a really good job of kind of capturing that moment.
Memorializing it, yeah.
Memorializing it.
And it's also important to remember the roughly 6,790 Jewish people who were deported from Rotterdam.
Via Lutz 24.
Yeah, and sent to Nazi concentration camps between 1942 and 1943.
Horrible. And the vast majority of them, they didn't come back.
They didn't make it back.
There is a Jewish children's monument that was unveiled in 2013 to commemorate that tragedy.
Yeah, so after the war, there was this massive effort to rebuild the city.
Huge effort, yeah.
And because the city center had been so completely destroyed, it kind of gave them this blank canvas, to create something totally new.
Yeah, they could kind of start from scratch.
Yeah, and that's where we see this really dramatic shift in Rotterdam's architecture.
Yeah, and I think the opening of the Leenveen in 1953 was a great example of that. It was Europe's first car-free shopping street.
Really?
Yeah, super modern, really ahead of its time.
Wow.
Yeah, it got a lot of international attention.
That's fascinating. So they were really at the forefront of this kind of modern urban planning.
They were. And then you had the new central station in 1957, the Groothandelsbio. That was completed in 53.
And of course, we can't forget the Euromast.
The Euromast.
That iconic observation tower.
They put that up in 1960.
So all of this was happening in this really short period of time.
We were just building, building, building.
And then from the 1980s onwards, the city adopted a really active architectural policy.
Right, and that meant that as the old harbor areas moved westward, the central districts were ripe for redevelopment.
I see.
So they started building these super cool, innovative apartments, office buildings, recreational spaces.
And that's what gives Rotterdam this really unique and modern skyline today.
Absolutely.
And it's been recognized internationally.
Yeah, Rotterdam was voted 2015 European City of the Year.
And I love that quote from The Guardian that describes Rotterdam's skyline as putting the last 50 years of architecture in a blender.
Yeah, it's very apt.
So let's talk a little bit about the geography of Rotterdam. You can't really talk about the city without talking about the Nieuwe River.
Yeah, it really splits the city.
It divides it.
Right down the middle.
Yeah. And there are all these tunnels and bridges that connect the north and south parts of the city.
You got the Benelux Tunnel.
Yeah.
You got the Maas Tunnel.
Right.
The Erasmusbrug.
The Van Brienenoordbrug.
Yeah.
So quite a few.
Yeah, quite a network.
And the city center is mostly on the north bank.
That's right, but the development of Kop van Zuid has kind of extended that central urban area south.
Right. So it's kind of grown.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to note that a lot of Rotterdam is actually below sea level.
Yeah.
Like the Prince Alexander polder is 6 meters below NAP.
That's crazy.
That's incredible.
And the lowest point in the Netherlands is actually just east of Rotterdam.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So they're really living
Below the
sea level, yeah.
That's amazing.
It is, and that's why they have such a sophisticated water management system.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they have to be on top of that.
Yeah.
And then there's the Rot River itself, which has actually been modified.
Yeah, they changed the course of it back in the 80s when they were building the second metro line.
The Rot River, the same river that the city is named after.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So it actually flows into the Nieuwe Maas through these pipes now.
Wow, so it's not even like a natural river anymore.
Not really, no.
Yeah.
And they also have that artificial beach at Boomjesguide,
Right.
but you can't swim there.
You can't swim there?
No, not allowed. If you want to go swimming, you have to go to the Hook of Holland or the islands of Zeeland and South Holland.
Okay, so there's no swimming in Rotterdam proper? Not really, no.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So we talked about how Rotterdam is the heart of the Rijnmond conurbation.
And it's close to The Hague.
Right.
They share an airport, an efficient light rail system.
Right.
In fact, there's even talk about them officially becoming a metropolitan region, Rotterdam and The Hague.
Interesting. So they'd be like one big mega city.
Exactly.
Wow. And the Rijnmond region is part of the Randstad, right?
Yeah, the southern wing. And that's a huge economic area in Northwest Europe.
Yeah. I mean, it's super densely populated. It's, millions and millions of people.
Yeah, it's a hub for trade, innovation, culture.
Really important part of Europe.
Absolutely.
And what about the climate in Rotterdam? I mean, it's on the coast.
It's a temperate oceanic climate, so it's milder than places further inland.
So what's that like?
Well, you have cool winters with some cold days, but the extreme cold doesn't usually last very long. Summers are mild to warm. You don't get too many days above 30 degrees Celsius. Rain is pretty even throughout the year. Spring and summer are a bit drier and sunnier than autumn and winter. And of course, being a big city, you have the urban heat island effect.
So it's going to be a little bit warmer
A little warmer.
than the surrounding areas.
Exactly.
So now let's talk about the people of Rotterdam, because the city is known for its diversity.
Extremely diverse.
Yeah, a lot of people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, and there's a really high percentage of residents that have recent migration backgrounds from non-industrialized nations, like over 50%.
Wow, that's credible.
Yeah, it's very diverse.
And so there are big communities from places like Suriname, Turkey, Morocco.
The Dutch Caribbean.
In 2010, about 13% of the population identified as Muslim.
That's right.
And then there's also Chinatown.
Yeah, around West Cruscade.
So it's a real melting pot of cultures.
It really is.
And I think that diversity is one of the things that makes Rotterdam such a vibrant and interesting place.
It does, yeah, and you see it in the architecture as well.
Right, because Rotterdam is known for its modern and groundbreaking architecture.
Yeah, they call it Manhattan aan de Maas, and the architectural capital of the Netherlands.
And they have some really world-renowned architectural firms, right?
Yeah, you got OMA, that's Rem Koolhaas's firm.
Right.
Got MVRDV.
And Rotterdam has the two tallest buildings in the Netherlands, too.
They do, the Mansteren and the Zalmhaven Tower.
And some other really cool buildings.
Yeah, you can't talk about Rotterdam without talking about the cube houses, The Markthal, the Euromast, the Erasmusbrug, and the Van Nel-Fabrik, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Wow. So there's no shortage of really cool architecture to see in Rotterdam.
No shortage at all.
And they also have a lot of parks and green spaces.
They do, yeah. They really value that.
Yeah, which is nice because it's a big city.
Yeah, you need those green spaces. Yeah, you've got Het Park, you got Museum Park, Diergaard Blijdorp, that's the zoo with the awesome Oceanium.
The Uranium?
Yeah, and then the Kralingsboys, it's more on the outskirts, but it's huge.
Wow, so they've really made an effort to kind of preserve that green space in the city.
Yeah, and there's this cool initiative called Op Zoomeren, where the residents are actually actively involved in greening and improving their own streets.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's very community-oriented.
And the city encourages green roofs too, right?
Yeah, the Groothandelsboer has a huge one, and then there's the Dak Park.
So they're really thinking about sustainability
Absolutely.
and the environment.
Yeah.
And it's a city that loves sports.
Oh, yeah, they call themselves Sportstad.
Sportstad.
Yeah, so, they've got the Rotterdam Marathon, they've got the Rotterdam World Tennis Tournament.
Big events.
Big events.
Yeah.
And, of course, football's huge there.
Right, huge football culture.
Feyenoord, Sparta Rotterdam, Excelsior.
But Feyenoord's the big one, right?
Yeah, Feyenoord is the big one. They have a rich history. Their stadium, De Kuip, is iconic.
Amazing.
Yeah, and they've also hosted some big cycling events. The Grand Départ of the Tour de France back in 2010 and stages in other years. They even hosted the Eurovision Song Contest in 2021.
Yeah, they did. So they're really putting themselves on the map as a destination for these big
Absolutely.
international events.
Yeah.
But we can't talk about Rotterdam without talking about its rivalry with Amsterdam.
Oh, yeah.
It's a classic.
Classic.
Yeah, and they're all those sayings, right?
Yeah, like Amsterdam to party, Den Haag to live, Rotterdam to work.
And what about the one that the Rotterdammers say?
Oh, that's a good one. They say, money is earned in Rotterdam, distributed in The Hague, and spent in Amsterdam.
I love it.
Yeah.
So they definitely have this, this friendly rivalry.
Yeah.
But despite that, Rotterdam is a major cultural hub in its own right.
Absolutely.
They've got some great museums, the Museum Boijmans van Beuningen, the Kunsthal, the Maritime Museum.
Yes, that's right.
And then they have the Rotterdam Philharmonic Orchestra, which is world-renowned.
Yeah.
And then festivals, the North Sea Jazz Festival.
The Summer Carnival.
The International Film Festival, Rotterdam.
Right.
So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and they have a really diverse history with popular music, too. Like, they had the Krellingen Pop Festival back in the 70s.
Wow.
And then the Gabber music scene emerged there in the 90s.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar.
High energy.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of energy.
And then, of course, we have to talk about how Rotterdam connects to the rest of the world.
Yeah, it has a really great transportation network.
Yeah, they've got motorways, including a ring road that goes all the way around the city.
That's right.
Rotterdam, The Hague Airport.
Which is the third largest in the Netherlands.
So not as big as Schiphol, but
No, but still pretty important.
still pretty important,
Yeah, and they have really good train connections.
including high-speed rail.
High-speed rail, yeah, international.
So you can get to other parts of Europe
Easily.
very easily.
And their public transportation is great. The metro, that was the first in the Netherlands.
Oh, wow.
Trams, buses, water buses. They even have ferries to the UK.
Yeah, I mean, they've really earned their nickname, the Gateway to Europe,
Absolutely.
because of that port.
Yeah, the port is a huge part of that.
Yeah, and they have all these twin towns and partner cities and sister port agreements all over the world.
They do, yeah. You got Cologne, Shanghai, Baltimore, Hull, Kobe.
Wow.
Yeah, all over the place.
And there's even a town in New York called Rotterdam,
Yeah,
named after the Dutch city.
that's right.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. They even use the same coat of arms and motto.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot of different aspects of Rotterdam, but we haven't talked about some of the notable people that are from the city.
Oh, yeah. They have some pretty big names.
Like who?
Well, you got Desiderius Erasmus,
The philosopher.
the philosopher.
Yeah.
They named the university after him. Rem Koolhaas, the architect.
Amazing.
Robin Van Persie, the footballer.
Yeah.
Ruud Gullit, another footballer.
And then there's even Colonel Tom Parker.
Elvis Presley's manager.
He was from Rotterdam.
Yeah, it's wild.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of really interesting people come from the city.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how Rotterdam has kind of popped up in popular culture too.
It has, yeah.
Like I know Edgar Allan Poe mentioned it in some of his stories.
Yeah, and Jackie Chan had a movie that took place there, and it's even been a map in the Battlefield video games.
Oh, wow. So it's definitely made its way into popular culture.
It has.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Rotterdam, what are some of the key takeaways?
Well, I think, we've seen how the city has shown incredible resilience in the face of, really devastating events.
Absolutely.
They were almost completely destroyed in World War II, and they came back stronger than ever. And their architecture, it's so bold, so innovative. They've really reinvented themselves.
Yeah, and they haven't forgotten their roots as a port city.
No, absolutely not. They're still a vital part of the global economy.
Yeah, and the diversity, the culture, it's also fascinating.
Yeah, it's a really vibrant and dynamic
So
place.
yeah, we've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah, there's so much more to explore.
So it's kind of left me thinking, Rotterdam has gone through this amazing journey of destruction and rebirth. What can we learn from that? About urban planning, about community resilience, about how a city's identity can change over time?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think it's something worth thinking about.
Absolutely. So, yeah, we encourage you to kind of delve a little deeper, check out the sources that we've provided, and, learn a little bit more about this amazing city.
It's worth it.
Yeah. So, thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into Rotterdam.
Yeah, it's been fun.
We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
That's good.